Well, hi everyone, and welcome once again to this week's edition of Feeling Smarter. As always, I'm joined by Tim Miller. G'day, Tim. How are you?
Yeah, going pretty well, Aaron. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you. Well, we're sticking to the theme of property, which naturally is part of our upcoming SMSF Masterclass on the 4th of June, where we're going to be looking at all aspects of property in respect to our Little Brewers Super Fund and our Malthouse family. Last week, we spoke about the structuring of property within SMSFs. And today, Tim, I thought we'd explore some of the considerations in the transferring of property within SMSFs, because it is one of the related party exceptions when we think about the SIS rules in being able to transfer certain property. And I use the word certain because obviously the common one is, well, I can transfer residential property into a fund, which we clearly know is not the case. But when it does come to business real property, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, that's right. And it's one of those things is obviously understanding what you can and can't do with regards to acquiring property, but also understanding that when you're talking about what you can and can't do, you're talking about it with reference to based on where you're actually acquiring the property from, because you can go out and acquire any property from an investment strategy point of view that's not being acquired from a related party as such, if you feel that that property is going to suit the needs of the super fund, but where you're specifically looking at acquiring property that you have some form of ownership in already, then you've got obviously other hurdles to jump. And those hurdles aren't just superannuation hurdles. They're obviously hurdles that are linked to personal taxation, but also what entity currently owns the property, and what other sort of I guess considerations both at state and federal level do you need to take into consideration?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really great point that you raised, because in a lot of instances, when you're talking to clients about wanting to transfer business real property in, and the transfer could mean that it might be acquisition related. So as in there's an exchange of cash, and it could incorporate limited recourse borrowing arrangement as well. But it's understanding not only the SIS requirement of getting it in, and we're looking specifically there at the related party acquisition rules, but it's actually then knowing, well, what's the outcome or what's the optimal process to move it from the entity that it might be at. So it could be within a family trust, it might be within a company, it might be held individually. And there are multiple hoops that we need to work through to get ourselves to the eventual, goal of potentially having that held within the SMSF.
Yeah, that's it. That's correct. And in doing that also, then identifying, like I mentioned before, with things like state-based taxes. So when we're looking at, everybody's favorite subject matter when it comes to property, which is stamp duty, whether or not there are potentially any stamp duty hurdles that you need to overcome, or stamp duty exemptions or exceptions that you might be entitled to. But also understanding, particularly when you're looking at something like a limited recourse borrowing arrangement, that you don't want to end up with a double stamping event where there isn't really any movement, where you're moving the money, say, from the original owner to the holding trust, and then the holding trust to the super fund. You don't want to trigger a liability that you could otherwise avoid just by getting things right from the outset. So all of these sorts of steps are fairly critical.
Yeah. And I guess one of the first areas that we need to be exploring in this as well is making sure that our deed naturally allows for the acquisition of the property. So we've got, I guess, potentially a contribution element. We may also have there the definitions and the ability to acquire as well. And one topic that naturally we've spoken about more recently is the implications in an income tax perspective is around NALI, and the change that we've seen in the ATO around what is a contribution, and that in specie notion of getting that asset into the fund and ensuring that it's reflective of in the contract value to its market value that it is being acquired for.
Yeah, that's it. And I think when we look at the whole acquisition from a related party scenario, where firstly we have to satisfy the requirements of what we can and can't acquire from a related party. So, without giving away too much of the masterclass, business real property is clearly what we're targeting there. But then when we're doing that, as you rightly say, how are we going to do it? Do we have the cash capacity? Are we going to borrow to do it, or are we going to utilise contributions? Now, both you and I come from a time when there was no contribution limits, and you could quite easily transfer a property in for the full value. But now with our caps in place, it's highly unlikely that you're going to find a property, or certainly from an investment point of view, a property that's going to fit underneath the contribution caps in many instances. And so therefore, you're going to look at combinations of contributions and acquisition or straight out cash purchases from the super fund. And that's where these new gnarly rules, and I say new, in theory, they've been in since 2018, but we're still waiting for final clarity from the tax office in some of these matters. But you want to make sure you get it right, because you don't want to tarnish these investments as non-arm's length investments from day one, because then that defeats the entire purpose of bringing it in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the other areas that really stick out for me in this area is GST. So I go back to and have fond memories of the $1 million opportunity in sort of the 2006, 2007 period, where amazingly, there was a lot of commercial property that seemed to be valued at $1 million or $2 million to allow for that to get into superannuation. And a lot of that was being moved from family trust structures, and therefore understanding not only the things like small business concessions, how they could apply with BRP, given that it was an active asset, but in a lot of instances, getting the trail right and the documentation that supports that was crucial as well, because if it wasn't done correctly and we didn't have that enterprise running in essence, where it made it to go from the trust and then the trust potentially as a distribution to the individual, and then it was made as the contribution into the fund, we ended up in a scenario where a lot of these funds were audited as part of that $1 million opportunity. And I know it was equally the case when it was listed shares as well, is that they were then caught with a GST liability because you didn't go through all the relevant steps there. So again, just another example of an area that needs to be considered as part of the transfer process.
Absolutely. Yeah, look, and the reality is, we could talk for hours, and we will talk for hours on all of these issues, because we want to make sure that that people get the steps right, and ultimately get what they're trying to achieve right the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, once again, thank you, Tim, for joining me.
No problems at all.
Excellent. And again, for those of you that are interested, our SMSF online masterclass, where we are looking at the topic of property, it is coming up on Tuesday, the 4th of June. It is a 3-hour masterclass. You can find out more by going to the Smarter SMSF website, smartersmsf.com/events, and you can register to join us. Or if you are already one of our CBD members, you will have received an invite to register for this automatically as part of your subscription. Thanks again, Tim. Let's chat again next week. Bye for now.
See you, Aaron. Bye.